Hello and how's everyone today? I hope you're doing well. Unfortunately for me, I'm going to be flying solo for this episode because my fellow crews have unfortunately abandoned me for this couple of episodes. So today we're going to talk about a weakness or a vulnerability. All these weaknesses or vulnerabilities are coded into a document called the CWE, which is the Common Weakness Enumeration by the MITRE Foundation.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Security Lah Podcast, Season 2.
Now, most of you would have known MITRE from the MITRE Attack Framework and the MITRE Defend Framework. They also document these vulnerabilities. So, today, we are going to talk about CWE-655. Now, what's CWE-655? It refers to insufficient psychological acceptance. So, what has psychological acceptance got to do with security? Actually, a fair bit, because when we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about users. And most often than not, we tend to blame users to say, users the weakest link in the defense. They should have done better, or they shouldn't have done something that they shouldn't do. Reality of the situation is that users are often forced to make decisions that they may not want to, or simply because it makes their work easier. Now, nobody likes to take 10 steps if you could do it within 2 steps. That makes more sense rather than having to do the same thing and achieving the same result without going through a lengthy process. So, what does this mean? So, MITRE has defined it as a software protection mechanism that's either too difficult or inconvenient to use, which indirectly encourages users, whether malicious or non-malicious, to disable it or bypass the mechanism. Well, this can happen whether it's by accident or on purpose. So in this context, we assume all users are quote-unquote innocent, and they just happen to want to get their work done as soon as possible, right? And this reminds me a time when I was one of the first users of Hotmail before Hotmail was acquired by Microsoft. And those days, you don't have post parameters in HTTP, you only have GET. I still remember looking at the address bar on the browser when I logged into my Hotmail account, and to my horror, I could actually see my username and password. So the running joke those days was that, why don't you use my laptop and log into your Hotmail account? So we could actually figure out what the other person's password was just looking at the address bar, right? But of course, this runs slightly away from psychological acceptance. But to give you a view of how security has moved from a get variables into post and all other means of sending communication back and forth. So some of the examples given on how these mechanisms can fail. And the most common one is if you go into any organization, if you're a user, if you're an internal user, guess what happens? You'll be given with this 20-30 page of security policy, and one of it is password policy. Thou shall use uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers, and a combination of all this together with a few emojis before you decide how your password is going to be, right? So guess what the average Malaysian or Singaporean user is going to have his password? Chicken rice 66 at, I don't know where's a good chicken rice place. No, not coming to my head. Okay, so I think you can guess what the password is going to be. Chicken rice 66 at some makan or eatery shop. Yeah, it's long, it's complex, it has a symbol in it, and it works, right? So guess what happens? Now that I have this chicken rice at 66 makan place, now I have to sit down and remember this password. I may forget it. If I go on a holiday or if I take my downtime, the next thing I'm going to do is, hey, what's the password? And I don't want to change the password because once I change, the next 90 days I'm going to change it again. So I have to figure out how to have complex passwords and yet at the same time preserve that level of complexity. So, guess what I do? I got all these nice colored sticky notes. So I'm just going to write it. And so that no one knows where this sticky notes is, I'm just going to put it below the keyboard and innocently pretend as if nothing happens. So in one of my roles in a large multinational organization, we did a walk-by check during lunch. So the only thing we did was we lifted keyboards up. That's it. Nothing else. So we lifted keyboards up, and from about 200 desks that we visited, we got about 50. 1 out of 4. That's a really good odds for me to penetrate into the organization. And some people are very friendly in their nature. So what they do is they even have a sticky note on their monitor that says, this is my username. Because, well, unfortunately, usernames are not that intuitive, so to say. So when I was working for a manufacturer, it was the first character, which is whether you're a full-time employee or not, 2 characters, which is acronym of your name, and a running number. So if I go back to that organization anytime in the future, that's my user ID for life. That's not going to change, right? So in these kind of instances, user IDs are fairly predictable. If I want to know someone's user ID, the easiest way is I just go and look at their email address. And chances are the first bit of their email address is not going to be their full name, but it's just going to be the user ID. So I got one piece of the puzzle. The only thing I need is the password, right? In one of the organizations where I remember implementing a longer password, because one of the audit finding was that passwords are too small, easily cracked. You need to make it longer. So of course that presented with a 2-prong issue. The first one was the fact that whether systems allowed us to make changes to increase the password size, because some systems are very old. They don't go beyond 8 characters. And in fact, you are lucky if you can hit 8 characters. Some systems are stuck with even 6 characters. So then how do you change those systems? That's another problem, right? And of course, then you have systems that allow you to accept longer passwords. Great. Now I'm an average user, right? Forget about what my IQ level is, but I'm your normal average user, and I'm presented with this problem. I now have to have a password that is long enough. Somehow I managed to crack whatever little gray matter cells I have, and I got this 8-character password. So now I have to change it to 16 or 20 or whatever number of characters. What do I do? Let me think. Okay, why don't I do this? Let me take the same password. I type it twice. Lo and behold, the system accepts it. So, awesome. I've now met the corporate security requirements by ensuring that I use long enough password and I can remember. Right? Some users are a little bit more tech savvy. I have this nice, awesome tool called Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word. So what do? I create a file, passwords.xlsx or passwords.docx, and I put them in and then I categorize them very nicely. Application A, this is the username, this is the password. Application B, username, password. And guess what? I have a list of all the passwords. And if I need to change them within 90 days or whatever, I know what the old password was. All I probably need to do is add a character or add a number or add a running number, 2 digits, just to make it a bit longer. You can put in 2 digits. And guess what? Awesome, it works. The whole objective of having long passwords is so that you can't brute force it. You can't run a dictionary attack. You can't do something that is easily guessable. But unfortunately, for the average layperson, they will not understand this. They will say, you know what? This is just a password that I got to put in. I'm just going to put in the password. I don't care what it is. I just need to know I am able to remember it so that the next time I got to change it, I know how many digits to add or what digit to change, right? So depending on different kind of users, you have different kind of password hygiene type of forethought, right? And what about this Word document or this Excel document? I don't need a password for it. It keeps my password. So why do I bother having a password for a password, right? And guess what? Someone gains access to that file and they now have all of that particular user's access credentials. Well, in some of the APT attacks we've seen, that's one of the low-hanging fruits. Now, low-hanging fruit means that's something that I can easily grab and start using. And you'd be surprised to see that high credentials or high privilege accounts, such as domain admin accounts or forest admin accounts, have been found on these kind of Excel passwords, right? Now, that's just one example of how this feels. Now, if you use websites, you will traditionally see this set of images, that's going to say that, okay, please click on a school bus. And I can bet you 100% of the time, the image of a school bus is not the image of the school bus that you are accustomed to if you're out of the United States of America. You will always see a United States of America bus. You'll always see a United States of America traffic light or pedestrian or something. So guess what? I'm not from the USA. I wasn't born in the USA. I wasn't raised in the USA. Well, thankfully, I had a couple of years of education in the USA, but that kind of helped me know, this is a school bus, right? And click this, click this, click this. The reality of the situation is a person who's not gone out of the US or gone to US would have any idea how a school bus in the US looks like. And I can tell you, if you start Googling how school buses look like, say in Asia, for example, in Singapore or in Indonesia or in India, you're going to see that they look totally different. And sometimes the images are so complex, you end up scratching your head and say, which one am I going to select? And I've gone to a point where, being a security professional, I end up selecting some images and it says, error. You still haven't selected the right images. So it gives me a whole load of friction into how I can use that site more effectively.
Enjoying the show so far? Subscribe now so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Visit podcast.securityla.asia to get the links to subscribe.
The other thing we notice is that security is often something additional up and above what an average user uses, right? So if you're part of the elite group or you're part of the guys who are technologically savvy, you will use these options, and these options are made available for you. And guess what? The average user who's going to have his social media account hacked, chances are they're not even going to have their two-factor authentication enabled. Because you know why? Every time I got to do this, I got to open my app, I got to check the app, and I got to say, okay. And it's kind of like counterproductive, right? I just want to post this picture. Why do I have to do this, right? And it becomes very difficult. And at the end of the day, if you give users the option to disable them, chances are it will be disabled. And I can challenge you on this. Create a website, get decent enough people, and have the option for them to disable password login. And I can bet you at least more than 50% of them will disable password logins because I have to remember the password. I've got to do something to log into the system. There's always that one step that I have to take for me to get into the system. So what happens as a result? You now have to, best way to do, enable security by default and get it as part of the enrollment process. So to make, for example, two-factor authentication mandatory so that users will have this two-factor authentication. And to be honest, to me, two-factor authentication is great, but there's still a lot of friction between the two-factor authentication and me as a user, right? So now I have, for example, in my phone, I have about more than, about 25, 30 two-factor authentication codes. So guess what I'll be doing? Going to the site. Oh yeah, oops, it needs my two-factor. Okay, hold on, let me find my phone. So I scoot, I get my phone, I come back. So which one is this again? Amazon? Okay, I have a problem here. I got an admin login to Amazon to my cloud instance. I have one account with Amazon. I have another one with Amazon India. So let me try all three. By the time I get to the third one, it's like, we think you have a problem with your two-factor authentication, right? And I can't get in, right? So that stems from an issue of how security is always seen in solutions or how organizations roll out security. In most organizations that I've seen, security is always an afterthought. It's something that you bolt after once you've gotten your system. So think of it this way. You buy this nice brand new sports car. Awesome, top of the line, gives you about 1,000 horsepower, running on a 2.9 liter Ferrari engine V6. Gives you about 500 to 1,000 horsepower. Everything is nice. But guess what? There are no locks on the door. So what do? I got to put a lock in this door. So what's the easiest way for me to put a lock in this door? I get a latch, I drill some holes, put the latch, put a padlock, I'm done, secure. And if you look at it, a lot of organizations take this approach. It's not seamless. It's not something that you want, but you just got to do it because you just got to do it, right? And this creates a problem. So now I have this nice car and I have this ugly little latch outside of the car locking the door, and I have this big whatever brand of padlock that you want, put it there, and I jiggle around my pocket, and then I do something and I unlock the car, right? Interesting thing when you talk about car security, researcher has found a way to replay the security code that's sent from the remote to the car using a sniffer, a fairly cheap sniffer. And they've shown proof that they're able to replay the codes and unlock the cars primarily from Honda manufacturers. And that's out on the internet, so you can Google it. So how do we solve this problem? The first thing is that security should never be an afterthought. It shouldn't be something that you think, okay, you know what, I need to get the project up and running. Let me get it up and running and then I'll worry about it, right? So when you bolt it on after that, the users are going to say, this is so mafan. Sorry, my Cantonese. This is so tedious. I shouldn't be doing this. Is there a way for me to enable this? Can I bypass this? And the users are always going to find the way to bypass that, right? So how do you get this as part of the solution? And most likely when you're doing solutioning for an application, the developers will usually take the easy way out. Oh, I got to have this applet for me to do authentication, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'll do this. I'll just have this, my usual login screen where, the users do whatever they do currently. And then I take them to another screen where I put in this foreign looking applet for me to use those whatever security functionality you have, either USB, Ubico key or a two-factor authentication, and then I return it back into the application. So if you notice, the whole friction is there for the user to say, oh, if I can disable this, how do I disable this? And the user goes into settings and say, disable multi-factor authentication, and I just go ahead and disable multi-factor authentication, right? Now, taking cue from what has done in the industry, one good example is Facebook. They've engineered security so well for their internal users that doing things securely is much faster than doing things in the traditional way. So they've made multi-factor authentication, they've made all this very nice, sexy, but secure technology secure. And they've made it easy for the users to adopt it. And as a result, the users now are able to log in securely because that's much faster. That's something that I can just pick up, start using, and gain benefit from it. All right. Now, there's something that I like to say or to quote. Remember, given a choice, users will take the path of least resistance. So if they want to get something done, they'll try to take a shortcut, get it done fast, and thinking about security, compliance, governance, risk, and all that is definitely going to be an afterthought. If you're in an industry that is not heavily regulated, this is something that you will never, ever, ever think about until and unless you've had a huge breach, you had a huge data leakage, the market is crying blood, and you have to do something about it, right? So if you want to get to that path, it's going to be much more painful than enduring that little pain that you have to do before your solution goes out to the market. So another story I have is that I was in an organization where they've implemented web proxy. They said that, from a user perspective, we want to make sure we improve their web experience and, so that we can save bandwidth. So they went down from 100 meg of internet bandwidth to about 65, 70 odd meg because the proxy was actually caching the pages. But they now realize, I have a proxy. What else can I do with it? They realized that they could block sites. So they found out that 80%, proxies give you very nice visibility of how user trends are, what they do and all that. They found out two things. Number one, users were going to pornographic sites. They also found out that users were spending a lot of time on YouTube. They didn't really find out why. Of course, the first one is a big no-no, right? Especially in corporate environment. The second one was that they had no idea why users were spending time on Facebook. So they went, zapped YouTube and this pornographic site, and the bandwidth went down further to about 45 megs. Awesome. So then, a couple of weeks later, they found out that their bandwidth was back up to about 89 to 95%. They checked the proxy utilization was 45. So they were dumbfounded as to what happened. Eventually, they found out that when they implemented the proxy, they did not block internet access directly at their firewall. So as a result, they implemented proxy, they rolled out the configuration down to everyone. They missed out that tiny little thing where they need to block all other traffic outgoing from the firewall. So the firewall was actually processing outgoing traffic from the proxy as well as the internal user. So as a result, guess what happens? Everybody's going to say, hey, why don't I just remove this proxy setting and boom, the traffic is now out. So everybody started using the path of least resistance and they're out. So if you can give that value out to the customers, whether be it internal or external, they're bound to use your internal methods, right? So security is not just a single pronged approach. There's also this huge stakeholder called the users, be it internal or external. And you need to engage both of them to get into the right level of what you want. Of course, there are other types of psychological acceptance. For example, shadow IT is a huge problem in today's organizations because organizations rely heavily on the cloud. You have product development, sales, marketing. Now coming up and say, why don't I spin off this instance in AWS, DigitalOcean, Vultr, Azure, insert whatever your favorite cloud provider in this list, and I can get my job done. And the best part is I can charge it to my card and then I can claim expense. So emergence of shadow IT is now a big problem because security admin gets this problem and says, I don't know how to solve this problem. You know why? Because I can block these cloud providers. I'm going to end up blocking 90% or 85% of all these websites that users can't access. I can't be blocking ports because there are just too many ports and users are going to end up changing port numbers. So I have to block IP ranges. And if I block IP ranges, I'm going to end up blocking my own app, my own instance that users can't access. So you're now faced with another conundrum. I can't enable security because security needs to be disabled for these purposes. And because I disabled security for these purposes, I now have to accept this huge risk. And of course, there are other solutions that's going to help you identify what shadow IT is. And if you're interested to know more about shadow IT, what you can do about it, drop us a note, send us an email, info@securitylaw.asia, or drop us a message on our LinkedIn, Security Law. And if we get enough responses, then we might do an episode on this. So with that, I'd just like to leave today's episode by saying that engage your stakeholders, identify what you're doing, what you're trying to do. And if you plan it up ahead and make it seamless so that an average user could actually use it without very much friction. It means my motto is frictionless security. As much as possible, make it less friction so that the users will enjoy using it. They love the feature. They understand the security importance of why you're doing it, not because you have to do it, but because it's the right choice to do and it helps to give you that benefit in the long run. So having this in place makes you more secure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Security Lab. Make sure to visit our website at securitylab.asia, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show.